It is just a 6-game slate for today in MLB DFS, but don't let that fool you because it is a powerful 6-game slate with honestly a few too many pitchers available for us. We're going to talk about 4 today across pitchers and things to watch. I could have talked about a couple more too because it's a really good slate for pitching, which means that it's a little bit tougher for stacking. So it's a 6-game slate, plentiful pitching. There's minimal options with stacking that will inform the way we play things for today. I think it is a tremendous single-entry slate. You'll see why, given we talk about the pitchers here in just a bit, but a lot to break down for today and get you set for Monday night slate. So let's start it right now and get you set. Welcome on into the solo shop. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to get you set for Monday night's 6-game main slate. We'll lock set for 7:05. It is 7 games in the lobby, but the Twins and A's game already has been postponed. So do not use players from that game due to COVID-19 stuff. So make sure you are restricting yourself to the 6 games that will be played for today. Whether there is one significant note for tonight, that is in Kansas City for the Royals and the Rays, just 49 degrees there, and the winds are blowing in from left at 15 miles per hour. So I would say you downgrade hitters quite a bit there. Like it's not similar to last Friday where there were a healthy number of games with low temperatures. That's kind of the one outlier from a low temperature perspective for today. So I would downgrade hitters significantly in Kansas City for the Royals and the Rays. Upgrade pitchers too. We'll talk about that in just a bit as well. As with all weather stuff, do you want to get an update on that later today? So make sure you come back for our MLB DFS Q&A. That is at 4 p.m. Eastern every weekday on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter channels. We are taking your questions live on the air from 4 o'clock until 4:25 p.m. Eastern, getting you set for that night's slate. We can talk overall MLB DFS process. If you're having issues with some research you want to, talk about, you want to ask about pitchers for that night, hitters, one-offs, value plays, whatever is on your mind, ask me there, 4 p.m. Eastern every weekday, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. Also a big week here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. There is no PGA podcast this week because it's a team-level event. Brandon will still talk betting on our his Tuesday Q&A stream at 3:30 p.m. No PGA podcast, but NASCAR in Talladega coming up on Friday. Tom Vecchio still has you covered with NBA and NHL. And, of course, when applicable, UFC podcast from Austin Swaim as well. So a lot of reasons to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Just search for those words, numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you like what you hear or if you win some money, make sure you leave us a rating and review as well. What's going on, sports fans? FanDuel Sportsbook has a special offer for you this spring season. Same-game parlays allow viewers to bet on any NBA, MLB, or soccer game. Place a 4+ leg parlay on any game across those 3 sports. And if exactly one leg loses, you'll receive a refund credit up to $25 on the site. Come get involved in the action and place a same-game parlay on the FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 plus and present in Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $25. Terms apply. Gambling problem? In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Michigan, for confidential help, call 1-800-270-7117. In Tennessee, call the Red Line, 1-800-889-9789. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net or elsewhere, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Pitching preview for this Monday night slate. At the top, we have the 2 pitchers facing off with each other. A tremendous pitching duel between Joe Musgrove and Brandon Woodruff. Joe Musgrove 10-5, Brandon Woodruff 96. And again, facing each other, going to be a fun one for sure. Dustin May is $9,300. We got Dylan Bundy at $9,000, and then Jack Flaherty, Kevin Gausman, and Danny Duffy all at $8,000 or higher. And the top 2 starters on this slate from a talent perspective, and for me that's by a wide margin, are those 2 guys facing each other in Musgrove and Woodruff. From a DFS perspective, Musgrove is the top guy here. So let's start here from a pitching perspective for tonight because he is a no-brainer from a pitching perspective. He checks every box you look for emphatically. He was awesome last year. We just didn't really notice it as much because he was with Pittsburgh, a shortened season, but Musgrove has taken a new step this year, not just a no-hitter. He's had 3 really good starts so far. Musgrove is using a cutter pretty heavily, and it seems to be working thus far, mostly because it means he's using other pitches less, specifically his sinker, which he'll always take. In the 3 starts so far this year, Musgrove has a 2.04 skill interactive ERA, a 36% strikeout rate, and a 3% walk rate. And he's letting up hard contact just 5% of the time. That's one thing you do want to keep an eye on, or letting up barrels 5% of the time. And that's one thing you do want to keep an eye on when a pitcher is using more cutters or sliders. Check out the barrel rate, make sure it's not too high. With Musgrove, it's not. And again, we saw this last year. So I'm not concerned that he's doing this in a small sample. He's taking all that and putting it in an elite matchup. The Brewers' struggles from last year have very much carried over to this year, at least on the offensive side of things. Christian Yelich is out right now. That definitely helps out Musgrove as well. So this active roster of just an 85 WRC plus versus righty since the start of last year with a 26% strikeout rate. Those two numbers specifically are the worst marks on this slate against the opposing pitcher's handedness. So if I were to list out concerns with Musgrove, it would be a non-existent list. I have none. He is the top guy on the slate by a mile. So for cash games, you lock him in. For tournaments, you go overweight. You must go overweight on Joe Musgrove for today. It's a perfect situation, and I'm not going to overthink that. So that's why I want to go single entry. I just want to lock in Musgrove, use the 2 stacks I really like, and play things pretty straight for today. It is a good slate to do things like that. Now, if someone's going to outscore Musgrove for today, they're going to need a bunch of strikeouts. And that's why I would still put Brandon Woodruff second, even though he is in a tough matchup for today. He is facing the Padres. They have a 125 WRC plus against righties and just a 19% strikeout rate. They don't make matchups much more difficult than that. Thankfully, Woodruff is very good. He might be one of the guys who can live in that situation. If we look at him toward the end of last year, we saw Woodruff using a curveball a bit more often. It's not a big strikeout pitch for him, but it does a really good job of limiting the damage on balls in play. So increased usage on that curveball could make Woodruff better overall, but it could hurt his strikeout rate and inherently hurt him from a DFS perspective as well. That latter part of a decreased strikeout rate and decreasing his DFS appeal actually hasn't happened. We're up to a 7-start sample now with more curveballs from Woodruff, and in that time, he has a 33% strikeout rate, which is just 3 percentage points lower than Musgrove. His barrel rate against is 5.8%. That is better than average. So the gains for Woodruff actually seem pretty legit, and 7 starts is not a small sample for a number like strikeout rate. To me, that means Woodruff is easily the second best pitcher on the slate. Now, that matters a lot, even in a tough matchup here with the Padres. The gap between Musgrove and Woodruff, for me at least, is pretty massive, so my exposure will be treated as such, where although I think Woodruff is number 2, I'm going to have a lot more Musgrove than him, but I'm still going to use Woodruff even in a nightmare matchup, and I think he's still number 2. We'll talk about Dylan Bundy in things to watch. He could be right on par with Woodruff, but I do think that Woodruff, slight edge there. We'll talk through Dylan Bundy in things to watch because he's the third best pitcher on this slate. Now, we do have a third slot in the pitching section here, so I could talk about Bundy there, but he's 9,000, and I don't want to talk about 3 of the top 4 guys in salary for tonight, so we'll put Bundy in things to watch. The third guy we're going to discuss is a tiny bit lower from a salary perspective. That's Danny Duffy at $8,300, and I actually recommended stacking against Duffy a week ago. So it was not that long ago, and he made me look very silly. And it's not just me being salty because he did well against me. I actually think that this is a really good scenario for him. And the things I've seen from him in his 2 starts this year have been encouraging enough where I'm okay changing my tune on Duffy very, very quickly. In that game, Duffy went 6 innings, allowed just 1 run. He had 6 strikeouts there, and he had 5 to start before that. And from a DFS perspective, 11 strikeouts in 2 starts is not very much. But it's important to look at the teams he faced in those 2 starts. The first 2 starts for Duffy were against Cleveland and the Angels. Those 2 teams, if you look at numbers versus lefties since the start of last year, ranked 2nd and 9th in strikeout rate versus lefties. Duffy is facing the Rays today. They are 28th. So this is a radically different matchup than what Duffy had his first 2 starts, and that means that the numbers he put up there, we should jack them up for a matchup with the Rays. Now, the Rays are not like some super soft matchup. I know they let us down for DFS a bunch the past couple of weeks. They're not a soft matchup. They do get some hard contact, so it's not like it's a no-brainer type spot for Duffy, but it's a much higher strikeout spot than Duffy has had so far. He's been effective even without having that at his disposal. And I'm a believer that he'll be better this year, given what we've seen now across 2 starts. He's throwing fewer sinkers, more sliders. That is the ideal combination for us here on the solo shot. Sinkers suck, more sliders. Sounds great. The velocity is up a bit too for Duffy. It's the highest it's been since 2016 on his 4-seam fastball, and that might not stick. We see a lot of variance when it comes to things like velocity, especially for a 2-start sample. Weather can influence that, but you would expect to go up as the year goes along. He's already throwing pretty hard right now. It might not work, but we have some data to believe that it could work, and I don't think a bunch of people will be on Duffy for tonight. So it's not enough for me to go super hard at him because I love Musgrove so much. Like, there's a small piece of the pie that Duffy, Bundy, and Woodruff are all fighting for, but I think that you can justify using some Duffy as a result of the matchup, as a result of what he's done so far. So I would say Musgrove should be in more than, at least for me, more than half my lineups by a pretty significant margin. And then you divvy things up between Bundy and then also Duffy and Woodruff for those final spots. Dustin May, pretty defensible as well. I could definitely see that, but I think those are the top 4 for me tonight, and all will be decently low exposure just because I think that Musgrove is very clearly the top arm for tonight. Let's move down to stacking. We do have to kind of keep in mind that we are allocating 10-5-ish to Joe Musgrove, so keep that in mind here. We are looking for some value plays, which may sound hypocritical because we're going to talk about the Angels. But they're facing Kohei Arihara, and I think that it's worth it to scrounge a bit in our second stack if we can get Musgrove paired with the Angels. We tried to stack against Arihara last week, and it did not work. He went 5 2/3 scoreless innings, which is good for him because he needed that. Good to see him kind of get his feet underneath him here in the big leagues. But the things that led us to stacking against Arihara last week are still in place right now. So I'm going to go right back here with the Angels. The 2 reasons we wanted to stack against Arihara last week were that he let up a lot of balls in play, and he was letting up hard contact on those balls in play. He did get 5 strikeouts against the Rays, but he still didn't walk anybody, which means he let up a ball in play 75% of the time, and 7 of those 15 balls in play had an exit velocity of 95 miles per hour or higher. So basically, the hits just didn't fall for the Rays there. And they're a higher strikeout team than the Angels, so the Angels should put even more balls in play in this spot. That is a big bonus for us from a stacking perspective. They're also just not a bad offense. The Angels have a 112 WRC plus versus righties since the start of last year. I think the right call is to stack against Arihara here once again, and I'm likely going to keep doing so until one of the 2 big factors of stacking starts to trend the other direction. Fewer balls in play, more or less hard contact. If he gets one of those 2 things, I'll stop stacking. But until I see that, I will keep going here, especially with a team that I think is pretty talented with the Angels. And stacking the Angels means getting to Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani when you can. But I'd make sure you don't gloss over Jared Walsh in that process. He's $3,500, so it's not easy to get Walsh with Trout and Ohtani, but I think he's worth prioritizing. He has a 41% hard hit rate, a 41% fly ball rate, and a 12% strikeout rate against righties since the start of last year. But in that small sample, he actually does have a better WRC plus than both Trout and Ohtani. So I'm not saying he's better than them. I'm not stupid. I'm not saying Jared Walsh is better than Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, but I'm saying he's pretty freaking good, and I want to rotate through all 3 of those guys. I think that if you can use all 3, do it. Maybe you use someone like Jose Rojas at minimum salary, a bit lower in the order. If he plays today, you use Rojas and then see if you can jam in all 3 with Musgrove, maybe a lower salary at second stack. Try it. Like, definitely try it. It's worth it for today. But I think that when you are going through the studs on this team, make sure you do not overlook Jared Walsh. I think he is tremendous and someone we need to be conscious of using whenever we are stacking the Angels, in addition to Trout and Ohtani. The other stack I like a lot for today is the Giants, and they actually can help you a lot because they are low salary. They can help you get Trout and Ohtani more often with your other stack. The Giants are facing Chase Anderson. Anderson had some really bad results last year because he just his pitches got tattooed way too often, and the same thing is happening early this year. And it's not as if Anderson isn't trying to change. He is lowering the usage on his curveball in favor of more cutters and more changeups. And what's weird about that is that the curveball was not the main pitch getting rocked last year. It's also the one that got him the most strikeouts. And with the usage on that curveball being down, shockingly, his issues have gotten much worse. He has a 5.64 skill interactive ERA in 2 starts with a 16% strikeout rate. The barrel rate is still very high at 11.5%. The results have been fine. He has a 4.00 ERA in those 2 starts. It's just hard to see that sustaining with how rough the peripherals are for Anderson. So I think it's wise to go to the Giants here and see what they can do. Now, the issue we run into here is the same issue we run into every time we want to stack the Giants, is that we have to make sure the guys we're using will stay in the game for the entire time. So I have no concerns around Mike Yastrzemski. Brandon Crawford grades up pretty well because he stays in games. Evan Longoria, those guys are fine. Crawford, Longoria, Yastrzemski, they're fine. The guys we have to check out are the guys who get platoon. Tommy La Stella, Alex Dickerson, and Brandon Belt. They're all kind of risky. La Stella, risky. He left in the 7th inning twice. He's left in the 8th inning 3 other times. He hasn't had more than 4 plate appearances in any game this year. That's tough. Dickerson has left in the 6th once, and it actually happened last week, which is concerning, but he has more complete games, like full games played in his log. I would say Belt is probably the safest option of these 3. That's even though he's left twice in the 6th inning, he has gotten 5 plate appearances a couple of times. So I would say I'm going to stick mostly to guys like Yastrzemski, Longoria, Crawford, because I know they'll stay in there. But of those other guys, I think the Belt is the one who entices me the most. I think that he has the highest upside in the plate appearances he does get. I would go Dickerson 2, La Stella 3. So it is the 3 safe guys, then Belt, then Dickerson, then La Stella in terms of stacking for me for today. If you're looking for how you can find that stuff, go to Baseball Reference, go to that player's batting game log, and you can see games, or it'll say like CG for complete game start to 6, that means they left in the 6th inning, game start to 7 means they left in the 7th, et cetera, et cetera. So check that out for Giants guys specifically because they love some pinch hitters and defensive replacements. The third stack is tougher because there's no super obvious options for today, but I think we can feel good enough about stacking the Dodgers. They're facing Justice Sheffield. He's a really solid young pitcher. Solid is the word I would use here. And the long-term projection looks encouraging. There are just some aspects of his game that bode well for stacking, specifically on this slate where we're looking for a third potential option. And we've seen Sheffield go in the anti-solo shot route where his sinker usage is actually up a bit of late. Hate to see it. It's up specifically over his past 6 starts. And in that time, his strikeout rate is 20%. That's a low number, which is good for stacking. He's also not walking a ton of guys, which is good for our purposes as well. Sheffield does a really good job of keeping the ball on the ground. His ground ball rate was 51% last year. It's 55% in a small sample this year, but it's not weak contact on the ground. Like, it's generally well enough struck. So when it does get elevated, good things can happen. It also goes back to our other discussions where you can accept a higher ground ball rate if it comes with more raw balls in play. That's what we have with Sheffield here. Although we do prefer the Dodgers facing righties, they're not bad against lefties. They've got a 114 WRC plus with a 42% hard hit rate and a 40% fly ball rate, and they gain a DH today because this game is up in Seattle. I think they fit in well as the third ranked option we've got for today's slate behind the Angels and the Giants. The Dodgers also do have some salary savers here we can utilize when trying to get to Trout or Ohtani or Mookie Betts in the same team. Will Smith, $2,900. He should be in there whether as a catcher or a DH, so we can actually plan around him for once. Chris Taylor, $29. AJ Pollock, $22. All 3 of those guys have at least a 120 WRC plus against lefties since the start of last year. That is a terrible stat. Do not do as I say, not as I do. It's a terrible stat to look at, but the longer-term data on those guys is good versus lefties as well. So, I'm just using it as a way to show that they're good, but don't lean on that data. You want to look at strikeout rate, hard contact rate, fly ball rate, because those all stabilize much more quickly. But hey, good results are not bad. I would say start with those guys: Smith, Taylor, Pollock. If Pollock is in there, build from there, and build around those values. Then get up to Mookie Betts. If you decide to go like Duffy and you have some extra salary, then Corey Seager, I think, is sneaky good against lefties despite being a lefty. So if you already have Betts in there and you can go a second stud, I would say Seager is a really fun option. So start with the values, go from there when stacking the Dodgers for tonight. Let's finish up here with things to watch. I mentioned before that Dylan Bundy is the third-ranked pitcher for me. I could defend putting him second because he's got a really good matchup against the Rangers. It's an elite matchup, one of the best you could possibly have, but he's also had really, really nice velocity to open the season. He has a 29% strikeout rate in that time. So I would say that Bundy is like on par with Brandon Woodruff. So 4 usable pitchers for tonight, I would say allocate like however much you're comfortable going with Musgrove first, and then go to Woodruff, Bundy, Duffy, all kind of on the same level for me after Musgrove. So Musgrove number 1, everyone else kind of fighting for second place between those 3 guys, and Dustin May in that discussion at least as well. Not using him for DFS, but I do want to see what Joe Ross does tonight. He's facing the Cardinals for the second straight starts, which is a red flag, but he looked pretty good in the first outing. I'm not going to stack against him because this lineup is really bad, and Ross does a good job of limiting hard contact. So this is more of a forward-looking thing where I want to see what Ross does here so I know how to handle him next time his spot in the rotation comes up. Joe Ross, someone who was a pretty big prospect at one point. I know I had a lot of Dynasty League hopes pinned to him. Did not pan out, obviously, but some talent there for sure, and I want to see what he does in the second start against the Cardinals. Finally, I want to say that I'd be very wary of stacking the Royals tonight. They're facing Josh Fleming, and Fleming is a low strikeout pitcher. We want that for sure because it means they let up a lot of balls in play. When we get guys like that, I always say that pitcher needs to be an outlier in the batted ball department to overcome the lack of strikeouts. But Fleming is that outlier. He has a 64% ground ball rate in the majors. He had really good numbers in the minors as well. And it's also terrible hitting weather in Kansas City. So you're doing your research. You see Josh Fleming's low strikeout rate, below 20%. You're going to look for that fourth stack, and you might think that Kansas City grades out well as a result of that. I would caution you against it just because Fleming does that one thing so well and because the weather is so bad in Kansas City for tonight. So just actively saying I would be very wary of stacking the Royals for tonight as a result of the weather and Fleming's batted ball suppression talent. That is all that we have for today here on The Solo Shop. But again, back later today at 4 p.m. Eastern, breaking down your questions around today's slate and MLB DFS in general. That is on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Make sure you are subscribed there, but also make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed for all of your NBA, NHL, MLB, UFC, NASCAR, and eventually PGA once again podcast needs. Plenty of stuff going up each and every day there. Make sure you are subscribed and leave us a rating and review if you like what you hear. If you have questions for me before 4 p.m., I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you for tonight. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been The Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.